So we continue the various environmental impacts. So we have threats to marine ecosystems. So again, the ocean is another place that has not been fully discovered. We use a lot of plants, fish, animals that come out of the ocean for daily dietary needs. We've looked at ways to turn ocean water into potable, drinkable water. So how do we remove the salt for it and make it so humans can drink from it? Some key threats to ecosystems is one, overfishing certain populations for certain kinds of fish. So we get too many kinds of one fish, usually in the production of food. Some fish are more desirable than others. There are some fish that are more in danger of losing their fish populations. We have other different products like shark fin soup, which is a controversial delicacy in Japan, where the fins of sharks are cut off, and then the rest of the shark is tossed into the ocean where it dies because it can't swim without fins, but the rest of the shark isn't used. Decline of coral reefs. So if you ever go to beaches or go to coral reefs, one of the things is coral reef safe sunscreen you'll be asked to put on. Some sunscreens have been found to actually do a lot of damage to coral reefs. They kill off the plants, they kill off the coral, which is a living entity. Okay, we also have coastal development. So humans have a intrinsic need to live near water. And so houses along water are very desirable. When we build houses on water, we also increase the amount of waste that is near that water, the amount of products that are getting into that water, all kinds of different things. And then ocean acidification. So we have ocean pollution. Unfortunately, a lot of our plastics end up in water. Plastics are not really biosafe products. Their number one ingredient is oil. They take a lot of time to break down. They create a lot of toxins. It can take 25 to 100 years for a plastic product to break down. And during that entire time, it seeps toxins. You know, that plastic is one of the major dangers to marine life. And looking at what are ways that we can reduce that? How can we have less plastic in our oceans? Even how can we use less plastic globally, as we do not have the necessary means to recycle and dispose of it as we thought we have had. Okay, as we continue kind of talking about, so what can businesses do? Okay, one thing that businesses can do is innovate. So they can look for getting information, knowing about the sources of their supply, where is it coming from. They can offer protections for it. So how can I convince you to, do crop rotation? Can I pay farmers to expand biodiversity? Can I get them to use less water? Several industries, that's one of their major impacts is water usage. So they look for, how can I still manufacture this without using less water? Is it better to switch to glass than to continue to use plastic? Aluminum cans is another one too. Aluminum is a highly recyclable product. one that we can produce massively. So maybe I'm going to move to aluminum from plastic or glass. So different things that they're looking at where they say, you know, what are the impacts of that? Can I create a circular supply chain where if I have aluminum or plastic or products out there, are there ways that customers can return it to me to be reused? Are there ways that I can help customers keep it out of landfills? So, you know, different initiatives, for example, Nike has a product where they'll take your old shoes back and then they grind them down. They have one entire shoe line that is made from those recycled shoes, but they also make side products such as like playground mats, playground surfacing, that they take the soles from old Nike shoes and they break it down, they make a new product out of it. But that's just in hopes to keep those products out of the landfills. Okay. Being carbon neutral. You often hear this from companies that they're trying to be carbon neutral. This is that they want to, as much carbon dioxide as they produce, they want to be mitigating it. So looking at maybe they've added solar energy. Maybe they've found a way to clean and recycle their water in the process so that they can use water multiple times in a manufacturing process. Okay, and then of course, technology cooperation. So looking at when we have developed technologies in larger countries, how do we share those technologies with other countries and help them have access to different technologies and different provisions? Access to, for one thing that Nestle does is in areas where cocoa is farmed and they have a lot of cocoa farms, they will build wells. And so the cocoa farmers have better access to water and local water that they can get at a well versus needing to walk several miles to a stream. So working with others. Sukup is an Iowa-based corporation. Sukup does a lot with the Iowa State University, where they do a lot of technology development for food storage in other countries, for agricultural equipment in other countries, helping them to have access to those technologies and to those technologies in a way that works for them and for their locations. Okay. How do we get people to behave? So we have these codes of environmental conduct. So often these codes come out and countries or companies agree to sign on to them. So we have the Business Charter for Sustainable Development. So this was developed by the International Chamber of Commerce. Businesses can choose to get into this. Another one, like the ISO standards. This is very popular in manufacturing and supply chain management. If you meet ISO standards, you can get certification that shows that you're sustainable, that you're working on sustainable development. You can get LEED certified. That's also that it's showing that your building was built under certain standards, that you use sustainable materials, you thought about the environmental impact when you were building. We have this, many executives champion the idea that corporations have obligations to future generations. Those corporations want to be around longer too. The idea isn't that, you know, we go out of business eventually because there are no more resources. And so as a business, we have to think about how can we continue to exist forever and to create products forever, especially as consumers. So a lot of this is consumer driven. consumers press us to be more responsible. So they stop buying our products, or they refuse to work with us, or they tell us that we need to, as corporations, need to be more ecological and better stewards of the resources that we're using. But the idea is to continue on indefinitely, and we need resources in order to do that. Okay, so as we move into chapter 10, we look at a little bit more from just working with the earth, and that the earth is a finite resource, into policy and management and regulation. So what is the role of the government? Okay, as we talked about, no one owns the ocean, no one owns the air. So what is the role of the government in making sure that their citizens have access to clean air, but their corporations can also do what they need to do to create products and services? Okay, so we can look at, if we have common standards, if we set fines, if we have taxes, we can create incentives. So if we take the regulation from being voluntary to everybody just needs to do it for the common good, then we have less of a, I'm just doing it to be competitive, or I'm not going to do anything. Who cares if I ruin the environment as long as I'm selling products? There's a whole wide variety out there. So what the government usually does is create policies, penalties, fines, and incentives in order to get corporations to be good stewards, and even citizens too. A lot of the economic incentives, usually in tax credits or tax breaks, for moving to what are considered more environmentally friendly products. For example, there have been individual incentives for putting solar power in your house, or buying an electronic vehicle. There were years where there were individual tax breaks to people if you could say that you had switched over to an electronic vehicle. Okay, we have the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. They are the agency put in charge with environmental regulation. They were established in 1970. Okay, we have air pollution, water pollution, and solid and hazardous waste. So really what the federal government looks at is, how do we keep our air clean and safe? How do we keep our water clean and safe? And how do we control waste management and make waste management safe, especially when we're talking about the disposal of hazardous materials. Air pollution, we can pollute the air through multiple different ways. Our cars pollute the air. Actually, animals pollute the air. People pollute the air. Every time you breathe out, you're breathing out pollutants. So we express carbon dioxide as people. The idea is that when we create too many pollutants, the air absorbs certain amounts of them. Trees and plants help clean the air. They take in our carbon dioxide and turn it back into oxygen. So it's really about not producing more pollutants than the earth can handle. Okay, Volkswagen, you'll see that case study. So they violated our Clean Air Act by programming emissions control devices so that they polluted more than the law permitted. What those devices did was actually trick the emissions tests to make it believe that, yes, they were producing less emissions than they actually were. Volkswagen was, of course, fined extensively for this by the U.S. government, because, especially since it came out that it wasn't a fault of the vehicle, but it was purposely and maliciously done, rather than meeting the Clean Air Act standards. Okay, water pollution, when we dump garbage and solid waste into waterways. We even have our sanitary waste. So we talk about, like, when we flush our toilet, what happens with that? How does it get cleaned? How does it go back into the water supply? What happens to it? You know, what happens when there's runoff from farms of chemicals and like weed management and different things like that. Okay, so how do we keep water safe and drinkable, especially? I know, for example, one thing that's happening in Iowa right now is they're having a case of Legionnaire's disease. And Legionnaire's disease is when water gets aerated. So things like chillers or air conditioners, hot tubs, etc. Well, they have kind of a epidemic right now. There are over 70 people who have been infected with this Legionnaire's. They have not found out what the water source is yet, or where the impacted water is coming from, because it has to be water being used by a machine. They think they've narrowed it down to a set of air conditioners, but they're not exactly sure. But this is a public health issue that's been in a big issue. I worked for the city of Iowa City many years ago for the Public Works Department. And one of the things that Public Works works with is water. So this is water, land, infrastructure such as roads, bridges, etc. And one of the things I learned while working there was that, a lot of the times we hear that farmers are the biggest pollutants of water in the state of Iowa because they're putting chemicals on their field to help their crops grow better and to reduce the amount of weeds. Well, an interesting fact that I learned when I worked there, it was actually private citizens, because farmers measure very, very carefully what is put on their fields. It's measured out, it's diluted, it's maintained. And what the worst source of chemical runoff into water in the state of Iowa is actually people treating their lawns. Putting too much on their lawns, not diluting it, not paying attention to the directions, trying to maintain really, really green, weed-free lawns, and that is actually the highest source of pollutants. And so I've always thought that was an interesting fact about water pollution, because I know a lot of the time we hear this really negative message against farmers, and farmers are polluting our water and stuff like that. In fact, a lot of us are polluting our water and we're just not aware or trained to not pollute the water. Okay, so we'll continue this in the next video.